It's now an office. But these two buildings next door, these two buildings up here on the hill would have been the main features of the landscape while Lincoln was up here. And the veterans are actually the people who invited Lincoln to come stay at the cottage. The Lincolns never owned this house. They were guests of the soldiers the whole time. And so this building, the cottage, and then the cemetery, which is a couple hundred feet in that direction, were the main things up here on the hill. Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
All right. We're going to go inside the house. We're going to go straight through onto the veranda in the back. And if whoever's through last could close the door behind us, that'd be very helpful. Oh, awesome. I forgot to check if she was okay coming up the stairs. Everybody okay? Great.
So at the stairs, we're going to make a sharp right and then just follow you all the way down the hall.
Great. Good, good, good. So this is the veranda. It's the back side of the house. What I like about the porch out here is that you can really get a sense of the peace and quiet that the Lincolns were looking for while they came up here. It's also much warmer than it would normally be in February. The Lincolns were never here in February. But looking this way, they would have had a view of the Capitol. That's essentially due south that way. They would have had a view of the Capitol, the hills of Alexandria across the way, perhaps the river and downtown. And also this green lawn in front of us here was the encampment of a group of soldiers called Company K. They were detailed here from Pennsylvania to guard the president and the site, and they were very friendly with Lincoln and his family. Lincoln's son Tad was 9 years old when the family first came up here, and the soldiers gave him his own uniform. They gave him the rank of 3rd lieutenant, which is not real as far as I know, and one is not, can confirm. And one soldier wrote home to his mom that he'd been invited up here onto the porch to play checkers with Tad and Lincoln, and that he had lost spectacularly to the president. So the soldiers were very much a part of the family's life while they were here at the cottage, because they were essentially living in their backyard, you know. And if you are curious, that building off to the left there is where the veterans live today.
So what is the office building here used for? Any idea who rents it, or?
Oh, it's an office for the retirement home.
Oh, so it's for part of the same.
Yes, yes. What they do in the office, I don't know.
Same with the homes over here. Were they extant at the time?
Yes, these two with the red porches absolutely were. They were built as quarters for administrators of the home, and that's the purpose that they still serve.
Do you know how many veterans?
About 500.
500.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have to be a special rank or something?
You have to have spent at least 10 years as an enlisted person. So not officers, actually the opposite. And there's a couple of other requirements, it's age-related, health-related, but yeah. Yeah. All right, let's go back inside. We'll go into the room on the right first. You guys come on in. I'm going to close this up behind you. Right. So Lincoln did bring his family with him when he came up here. Tad was the youngest son. He was about 9, as we said. Lincoln's wife, Mary, was also here. Their oldest son, Robert, was mostly away at college at Harvard, but sometimes he was here as well. But their middle son, Willie, never really got to spend any time at the cottage because Willie died at age 12 in the White House in February of 1862. So when the family came up here for the first time in April of 1862, they were really looking for a place where they could cope with their loss. Mary Lincoln said, "When we are in sorrow, quiet is very necessary to us." And so that was part of what they were looking for when they came up here. In addition to the family and the soldiers out back, there were staff working here in the house. Mary Ann Cuthbert was an Irish woman who immigrated to the U.S., and she worked as the housekeeper. William Slade was African American. He was Lincoln's valet, which is kind of like a personal assistant. And then Mary Williams was the cook. She also was African American, but in her case, we don't know whether she was born free or enslaved. We do know that she and William Slade were both free while they worked for the Lincolns. So that's why we say staff rather than servants, to try and be clear about that arrangement. How do you guys think any of the people around him here might have influenced Lincoln's thinking? Do you think they would have or not?
Well, probably, especially if they were freed blacks, which would have been so different from the majority of blacks at that time that, kind of gave them an idea of what would happen if you emancipated the slaves.
Yeah, perhaps.
More than most presidents, I think, at that time, he seemed to have had a lot of experience with different social classes, which is probably what distinguishes him from other presidents, why he's so endearing, I think, because he worked on the frontier, he tended to have less social stratification than most, I think.
Yeah, and one of the things did you want to say something too?
One of our presidents said slaves aren't nice, and slaves, they chew you everything. They need a break.
Right, yeah. And what part of Lincoln's thinking was that slaves were people too. And one of the things I really admire about him is that he wanted to know what other people thought about things. He sought out other people's perspectives. He liked to have conversations with ordinary people. Mary Williams, in particular, was beloved by the soldiers. They called her Aunt Mary.
Aunt Mary, the colored cook, often came out on cold mornings after Mr. L had breakfasted and gave boys near house a cup of coffee and biscuit. One morning, when I had been on guard and was relieved, she called me in to give me breakfast off the very plate and fork and knife the President of the U.S. eats off. And I had it.
So I don't know if you'd be excited about presidential breakfast leftovers. I also think it's telling that soldier calls him Mr. L. Mary Lincoln, while she was here at the cottage, also spent a lot of her time visiting wounded soldiers, because there were 2 big hospitals up in this area, and she would go and visit, and she would write letters home on behalf of those soldiers.
My dear Mrs. Agin, I am sitting by the side of your soldier boy. He has been quite sick, but is getting well. He tells me to say to you that he is all right. With respect for the mother of the young soldier, Mrs. Abraham Lincoln.
What do you imagine it might be like to receive a letter like that? You said thumbs up? Yeah?
Probably something to keep the rest of your life.
Yeah, maybe.
Well, good news, great news for you, and that your son is doing well, and better news that it's written by the president's wife.
Right. Also, we know where he is. He's alive. We got him, And I think Mary Lincoln was the mother of 4 sons at this point in her life, and she had already lost 2. And so I imagine that writing these letters, she would have been able to empathize with the women she was writing to. Lincoln would commute the 3 miles to and from the White House every day. It took about a half hour on a horse or in a carriage, which is not that bad as far as DC commutes go. But this area was very rural at the time, so a lot of people were worried that traveling through this rural area on a daily basis would be a dangerous thing for Lincoln to do.
Your habit is to frequently ride out to your summer retreat, Soldier's Home. If you value your life, do, I entreat of you, discontinue your visits out of the city.
So he was assigned a group of cavalry to guard him on his way back and forth. But a lot of mornings he would come downstairs here into the dining room. He'd eat breakfast kind of fast, cup of coffee, maybe an egg, and then he would leave without telling the cavalry he was going. If it were you, would you want to have the cavalry along or not? No? You would want to leave them?
I like the security.
Mm-hmm.
But they would also call attention to you in a way that, I mean, he was so tall and, noteworthy himself, but still, having a group around you might actually flag you as someone important even more. So.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a sort of a both and, right? Lincoln would sometimes take them with him. Other times he would try and leave them behind and use that half hour riding through the woods in the morning as a time to think. Mm-hmm. I can imagine it would be very peaceful to do that and to have that space for yourself. The commute was also another moment where Lincoln could have conversations with ordinary people.
The president on the 4th, while on his way to his summer residence at the Soldiers' Home, meeting a train of ambulances, rode beside them for a considerable distance, conversing freely with the men, and seeming anxious to secure all the information possible with regard to the real condition of affairs and the feeling among the troops from those who had borne the brunt of the fight. New York Tribune, July 8th, 1862.
So because he was traveling the same route as those soldiers, Lincoln was able to stop and check in with them, see what they thought about what was happening. Those men in particular were coming back from the second battle at Manassas Bull Run. So the commute was a moment, again, where Lincoln could be accessible to people. I want to talk a little more about Lincoln and accessibility. We'll step through here into the next room to do that. Oh, it's a football. Sorry, I got distracted by your shirt. All right. So this story takes place in August of 1862, so it would have been hot and humid in D.C. Lincoln was very frustrated with the progress of the war at this point. His main general, McClellan, was wandering around near Richmond, not attacking the enemy. Lincoln was also getting a lot of criticism from abolitionists because he hadn't done anything about slavery yet, and some people felt like it was high time that he had. So he spent the day at the White House working, dealing with all kinds of things. He came up here to the cottage at the end of the day to sit down for a moment and threw his leg over the arm of his rocking chair. But a man named Colonel Scott had a pretty desperate request for Lincoln and had come up here to ask for help.
I was sick with fever in Virginia, and my wife came down from New Hampshire to care for me. We boarded a steamer bound for the hospital in Washington. That evening, as the steamer turned into the Potomac, she collided with another ship. My noble wife and dozens of others drowned. I was anxious to retrieve my wife's body and take it to New Hampshire for burial. In my despair, I came to you, Mr. Lincoln.
So Scott was pretty upset. This is how Lincoln replied.
Am I to have no rest? Is there no hour or spot when or where I may escape this constant call? Why do you follow me out here with such business as this? Why do you not go to the War Office, where they have charge of these matters?
I went to Mr. Stanton. He refused my request.
Then probably you ought not go down the river. Mr. Stanton knows all about the necessities of the hour. It will be wrong for me to override his rules in cases of this kind. And then you ought to remember that I have other duties to attend to. Heaven knows, enough for one man. Why do you come here to appeal to my humanity? Don't you know, Colonel Scott, that we're in the midst of war, and suffering and death press upon all of us?
How do you feel about Lincoln's reply there?
Not what you would expect from your image of Lincoln.
Mm-hmm. Was anyone else surprised?
A little.
Yeah? Can you say more about that?
It did sound, his tone sounded very harsh. I mean, I think it showed his ambivalence, though, because even though it did sound harsh, I think there was probably a part of him that would have loved to be able to address the situation. But he found himself in such a difficult, I just sense a man who's so, at the end of the day, so exhausted by his reality that he really can't deal with someone else's pain right now in that face-to-face situation.
Yeah, I think Lincoln does sound exhausted in this moment. He says, am I to have no rest? And I think you can sort of see Lincoln the person peeking through there, that he is 50-something years old, and sometimes people get tired. And he also is the president in this set of very difficult circumstances with people all around him who are handling loss, in the same way that he himself is also handling loss. But as you said, perhaps could have been a little nicer. There is a little more to the story. Lincoln followed up with Scott the next morning.
My dear Colonel, I was a brute last night. I have no excuse for my conduct. I've had a regretful night. Now, my good man, hurry and get ready. I have seen Secretary Stanton, and he has arranged all. I have my carriage here and will go with you to the wharf. And, Colonel, when you get home, don't tell your children of my conduct last night.
So Lincoln felt like he had made a mistake and went to go do something about it. Nobody knows like the real answer to this question, but what do you think might have happened that evening for him to change his mind?
Discussion with his wife.
Yeah, maybe. Maybe. Yeah.
I just think he spent a restless night tossing and turning about the situation. You know, just, yeah. I think he was awake a lot of the night, agonizing over the way he had responded.
And I think that's one of the interesting things for me about this story. Maybe he didn't sleep. Maybe he got a great night's sleep and woke up and said, okay, great. Maybe he talked to Mary. Maybe he missed her and then thought about Scott and his wife. We just don't know. But regardless, he felt like he had to make it right, and he went and did that. I want to talk about another visitor Lincoln received here at the cottage. We'll go through into the next room to do that. In this room, you're welcome to sit down if you'd like. We just ask that you don't move the furniture, please. All right? Come on through this way. Oh, really?
Yeah. I know Dan Stork. Look him up.
That's cool.
So, yeah, he's a Mount Vernon District Supervisor for Fairfax County.
Was there so Lincoln's son died of typhoid, right?
Mm-hmm.
Probably. Water poisoning. So was there a well here? How was the house supplied with water? Because I would imagine his wife would have been pretty agitated about the water source. So I'm wondering how they obtained it.
Yeah, I'm not certain about this. There was a creek nearby called Slash Run. So that would be a guess that I would have. I don't know if there was also a well. Yeah.
But we would have been really outside of Washington proper at this point.
Yeah.
So this would have been really out in the countryside.
Exactly. Pretty rural. It was a big country estate for Riggs. So just sort of even just the so many fewer people made a big difference in sort of the cleanliness of everything. Yeah.
Definitely upriver.
Yep.
The problems.
Yep. The population of DC ballooned during the Civil War, so there were a lot more people than anybody had really planned for. The story of this room centers around a British tourist named George Borrett, who came to DC in 1864 with two goals. He wanted to see Niagara Falls, and he wanted to meet the president. Of course, why not? So he came to DC, he waited in line at the White House to meet Lincoln, but it was very busy there that day, and he couldn't see Lincoln there. But he had a friend who said, well, if the president isn't at the White House, I know where he'll be, which is here at the cottage at the Soldiers' Home. So Bort and his friend got into a carriage. They made their way up here, but they got kind of lost on the way. So by the time they arrived, it was a little bit late at night. And they knocked on the door, and the staff told them, you cannot come in. Mrs. Lincoln has already gone to bed. President Lincoln is about to go to bed. But Bort's friend was really persistent, and eventually they were welcomed into the house, and they were brought into this room here to sit down.
We were ushered into a moderate-sized, neatly furnished drawing room, where we were told the president would see us immediately. We had sat there but a few minutes when there entered through the folding doors the long, lanky, lath-like figure with hair ruffled and eyes very sleepy and feet enveloped in carpet slippers. We all rose.
Oh no.
As a broad introduction to the presence of the highest in the land. Mr. Lincoln advanced to me and my fellow travelers, shook each of us warmly by the hand, expressed his pleasure at seeing us, and told us to take seats and make ourselves comfortable. We did so, and were hung once.
So Lincoln came in through the folding doors wearing his slippers with disheveled hair. It's kind of all messed up, and Bort and his friends were pretty surprised to meet the president in that state. Then they sat down to talk with Lincoln, and they very much enjoyed that conversation.
The conversation began, naturally enough, with questions about our tour, and the invariable interrogation that every American puts to a stranger as to what he thinks of our great country. And then he told us of the state of Kentucky, where he was raised, and made his first step to fame. It was a treat to hear him talk of his early life, with a certain quiet pride in his rise from the bottom of the ladder.
So in this conversation with Bort, Lincoln talked about America as a place where you could rise from the bottom of the ladder. How much do you guys agree with him on that?
Well, he did. So it seems there's truth to that.
And I think Lincoln's definitely using his own experience as an example in this particular conversation. Do you think, and I don't know if there's like a right answer to this question, but do you think it's more true now than it was then? Or more true then than it is now?
I think it depends on the individual.
Mm-hmm. On their experience, you mean?
Well, and sometimes what luck throws their way, and sometimes what opportunities they make for themselves and see. So,
yeah, I definitely think it sort of depends on where you started from, right? And Lincoln had grown up very impoverished in Kentucky. That's what he's talking to Bort about. His house there, his whole house would have fit inside this room. And he became the president, and he had put a lot of work into that outcome for sure. And he really valued that America was a place where his experience was possible. You cannot, for example, become the King of England by working really hard. And that's why Lincoln was talking to Bort about his own experience. But he was also very aware of the difference between his experience of America as a place where you could work really hard and get yourself where you wanted to be, and the experience of enslaved Americans, who were also working very hard and did not have access to the ladder in the same way that Lincoln did. And that discrepancy, that difference, was part of the dilemma that was confronting him while he was living here in this house, especially in the summer of 1862 as he went to figure out what to do about slavery and emancipation. He believed that America should be a place where people could get the products of their own work. If they put the work in, they should get the benefit out. And he was trying to find a way to make that more true. So I want to talk a little more about Lincoln's dilemma surrounding slavery. We'll go through the folding doors there into the next room. You want to open them with me? You want to come try? Yeah? You can say no if you want. But if you just, each of you push one carefully and we should be good. Awesome. Nice. Yeah, we can put this over here. You're welcome to sit in here as well if you would like. Would you like to sit?
Nothing.
No, you're good? Okay. This room was the library while the Lincolns were here, and you can see on that wall and also this one here where the bookshelves used to be there, sort of the ghost lines. And reading was a very important part of Lincoln's life. It was how he had educated himself. He had 1 year of formal schooling. Yes, for real. 1 year of formal schooling. I think it was like 3rd grade he went to. And reading was also something Lincoln would do to relax and wind down. One of his aides, one of his secretaries, John Hay, once fell asleep while Lincoln was reading Shakespeare aloud to him. And Lincoln would tell stories when he wanted to explain himself to other people. There's one in particular he told to explain his dilemma about slavery, and it centers around how we define liberty. So this might seem like a giant question, but how would you define liberty? What does it mean to you to be free?
To be able to go where you want to go.
Yeah? Can I go where I want?
The ability to pursue your dreams. Yes, just to pursue your dreams. Unencumbered by societal constraints.
Right. So I want to do something and other people are not telling me I can't.
Be your own person.
Can you say more about that?
Like, you can be yourself. You don't have to be the way someone wants you to be.
Right. Yeah, you get to decide. You have something too? Okay.
Free from persecution.
Yeah. Sort of freedom to and also freedom from.
The freedom of speech, to be able to speak up and to express your feelings about your beliefs in society and how things should be.
Without being afraid that somebody will squish you for it.
Yes.
Yeah. So Lincoln told this story. He says, Americans all declare for liberty, but we cannot agree on a definition of the word. So he told this story about a sheep, a wolf, and a shepherd. He says the shepherd stops the wolf from eating the sheep, and the sheep looks at the shepherd and says, "Thank you, you're a liberator, you have given me my freedom." The wolf looks at the shepherd and says, "You are a tyrant, you have taken away my freedom." So Lincoln says plainly the sheep and the wolf cannot agree on a definition of the word liberty. And he went on to say that that was the same problem Americans were experiencing during his time. Could not agree on a definition of liberty. And one of the things I think is interesting about that story is that's sort of the big question of how we run a democracy. When does my freedom to do what I want start to infringe on your freedom to do what you want? And what if we disagree about where that line goes? How are we all going to decide where the line's going to be? But the sheep and the wolf in Lincoln's story cannot both get what they want. They have incompatible definitions. And Lincoln was seeing that incompatibility in the people around him. He was also seeing it in the founding documents of the U.S. The Declaration of Independence promises life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and the Constitution upholds the right to property, which took the form of enslaved people. So again, those are incompatible. And what he was working on while he was living here in the cottage and reading in this library in 1862 was whether or not it was possible to get those two things to line up with each other. And for a long time, it seemed like it would be an impossible problem to solve. Have you guys ever had a time in your life where two people that you trusted were telling you opposite things? Yeah? If that did happen to you, what did it feel like? A ping pong ball? Yeah. In the end, the decision comes down to you. And I think that's a small piece of what Lincoln might have been feeling confronted with this problem of his. The decision had come down into his lap, and it was his choice to make about what to do next. And so in a moment, we'll go upstairs and we'll use the same banister and the same steps that Lincoln used. I like to imagine him sort of trudging up to bed here in the cottage, sitting with, working on, struggling with this impossible problem he'd been given to solve. How are we going to reconcile an America founded on principles of liberty that is also enmeshed with slavery? Yeah? All right, let's go out this way. We'll go upstairs. And I'm going to help her out with the elevator, so go ahead. And I'll show you where the elevator is so we can get you up. There will be... Yeah. Oh, hey, Phoebe is here to help. Thank you, Phoebe. That's awesome. Yeah, okay, great.